how do we feel about heteronormative roles that queer communities continue to practice, and ways this affects the progress that is to be made in the community?
Please repeat that.
Heteronormative roles.
roles.
How do we feel about them in queer communities, and why? Like,
How it affects us.
yeah, how does it affect us,
Feel like
and the progress as well?
Okay.
I've been saying a lot of stuff. So
Yapping.
For me, I don't resonate with being heteronormative at all. It feels like a chain. It feels like a cage. Yeah. So having it in the queer community is like, I don't know, it makes me really sad to see, because we're not allowing ourselves to be, just exist within our queerness. We're rather perpetuating what we were told to, or, what we were taught, right?
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I try my best not to perpetuate any heteronormative views in my relationships, and just allow my partner to be, and just allow them to be them and me to be me, nothing less, nothing more, honestly.
Real.
Yeah.
I would argue that as much as we can try our best to not want to be heteronormative, there comes a point where it's inevitable. And not to say we need to change this inevitability, because yes, hold on. Yes, heteronormative ideation is wrong, but in of itself is not entirely wrong. What's wrong is the binary thinking, the right and wrong, the A and B,
The black and white.
You see what I'm saying? You be the man, you be the woman. There's nothing inherently wrong with understanding that there's a dynamic, but let's give it again, like you said, collective freedom. Let's have an exchange, and when the exchange does happen, we don't say it's wrong, because what happens at that break, at that moment, you are with your queer partner. Shall we say, for me, I'm with another man, and it just so happens that because of our psychological trauma, and a huge part of our ego wants to integrate this trauma by almost wanting it to play out, but in a much more healthy way. Now what happens when I, in fact, do want a heteronormative relationship, or what the next queer person may call heteronormative, and fight me tooth and nail? It works for us. The idea isn't to say that unity itself is inherently wrong, but it's a binary thinking, because we can even twist heteronormativity and have very interesting manifestations. And as we've seen, the idea of top about it. Oh, there we go again with roles. This and this. What happens when we actually say there's nothing wrong with roles, but when you put the roles, don't put a ruler. Be yourself fluid, because you are innately fluid. Because to point heteronormativity and say that's wrong, we're perpetuating it, because we are assuming that there's a right and wrong. There's this binary thinking all over again of black and white.
Absolutely. I even think that the origins of heteronormative thinking in queer relationships was just to conceptualize femininity and masculinity. Having to be in a relationship with a masculine woman or feminine woman. Of course, no doubt, those all have assumed roles, but it's not necessarily always the case we've seen. I think it's interesting. It's just a very interesting thing to witness. I don't necessarily feel like it's inherently bad. What makes it bad is the enforcing, because you immediately become the oppressor, the thing that you hate, But it's such an interesting way to conceptualize or understand someone. Here's the thing about the human mind, or the human way of learning things. We always want to label, and this is why we also have pronouns, to kind of not necessarily attach ourselves to an identity, but to kind of have an idea of what we are. And this is why we use labels. So it's
like, yes, I'll label you that, but you can still be many.
You can still be more.
I think for me, and I recall having a conversation with my friend, and we were actually talking about like masculinity specifically. Now, again, masculinity and culture have a very complicated
relationship,
synergy,
painful history and painful place, right? Which I'm hoping we would get into, which is why I had posed the question about culture and queerness. But I remember the thing I said to my friend then was, my utopia is a place, a world where none of this matters. None of it matters at all, right?
And that's so
So I think that's the first thing I can say about what I do feel about like heteronormativity and like roles and gender as a deconstructivist is like none of it matters.
As
long
as you show up.
It all
sucks.
But I think again maybe homing in on Nike's point on like sometimes we want to do the idealist thing of being like, okay, well, none of it matters. But again, which is what I'm thinking about constructions is like sometimes they're there, right? Which means then we find ways to kind of reinvent, reimagine,
move through them without them being necessarily destructive.
Those are my thoughts, short and sweet.
I think people just latch onto them for identity, to see themselves in something.
Absolutely.
Not inherently because, they want to hold on so bad, they can't let go. It's just an identity thing. Because some people, when they don't have that, they feel a bit,
and
waving through the world
that's
lost.
Now the issue. Why do we maybe have to attach ourselves to things that are innately potentially harmful to feel like we have a sense of grounding in self?
Yeah.
It becomes
maybe this is my final thing, right? Just for us to think through. Maybe that the reasons why norms exist in the queer community is that when we have no frame of reference, like think about years of colonialism, years of apartheid that continuously tell us who we should be. You have no reference in 2006 when they say, okay, Civil Unions Act, you guys can get married now. And then it's like, what is the frame of reference? Okay, they do it like this. So then you get forced to compel to do it like this. Where it's like, we actually don't have to, but I guess that is our role, I guess, as like Abantu who are in the youth to be like, but you older queers, how about this?
This reminds me of something I learned in my own personal experience, and it's something that I would like to bring onto or introduce to everybody. It's called body consciousness, right? It was having to sit through being in a feminine body, being uncomfortable, being feminine, truly swallowing what my own womanhood feels like. Because I'm not going to lie to you, I can't associate my non-binariness without my womanhood or without my quote-unquote or manhood. They're all very intertwined, very same, right? So it's like having to conquer what it feels like to exude or express the feminine body, or what it seems like. It was very man. It was an interesting experience, but it got to teach me, it taught me a lot about who I am as a person and what femininity can be like and what femininity can show up as. I think a lot of people think of femininity and heavily associated with very softness, very
nurturing.
Yeah, very nurturing. But here's the thing about femininity, it can also be just as sharp, just as bold, just as powerful.
The masculinization of black women.
They didn't, hyper masculinize black women for no reason. It's still a way in which femininity shows up as, and it's kind of like looking at the scale from 0 to 1 and understanding that 0 and 1 are not inherently different, but it's one and the same story on different spectrums.
My last point then on that is what I'm realizing is that because everything is intertwined, heteronormativity exists because of other distinctions, right? Because we're speaking about blackness now, like the roles exist because blackness exists. The roles exist because desirability politics exist. The roles exist because fat phobia exists. The roles exist because race, because wishy-wishy.
It's just like unwinding earphones. It's like, you see what you guys did.
That is a dope example.
Right?
Open up the
it's constantly unraveling.
Yes.
This year we have here.
So that's so cool. Body consciousness is a very insane thing when you truly swallow it. It's kind of like allowing yourself to be a feminine but still a other.
Because they don't exist, guys.
They don't.
Okay.
Socially bred.
Okay, in what ways do you think mainstream culture has either helped or hindered queer visibility and acceptance in the spaces you've been?
What heavy?
Is it okay?
Do you want me to read it again?
Well, we get it. It's which angle?
Well,
Okay.
I have a library.
Today.
I have a library. I will start with hedonism, aestheticism, and online curation. And I think the queer, I don't want to say we do it well, but it is a huge culture. And it goes back to, again, when you're forming these communities, to what extent does it honor the idea of community, you know? And we're coming together to say, oh my God, I am being out there, I'm being queer, I'm being kind. And sexual. We'll get into that. But it's like, here you are posing this to be freedom, but it still has this conservative nature. Because I think also people, when they think of conservatism, they think, although its roots comes from that, long dresses, not showing skin, being decent, and the white man's imagination. But conservatism for me can also look like having a fixed mindset. If we're all coming out to look kind and to document that and put that on Instagram stories to tell the next person that look how happy we are, even though we aren't really. Can you see how it's still very conservative and it builds this narrative of shaming other people who decide to go and exist outside of that? I think
that's the thing about what you call as conservatism. It cannot exist without shame.
Yeah.
Because where you feel the most pride, you feel the most shame. It's just
Absolutely.
how it is.
So for me, that's the essence of culture in the queer community that I am most immersed in as like an artist, is the curation, the inauthenticity. Because again, for me, the whole idea of queerness is authenticity,
freedom.
But there's, again, so many labels that we're all following and we swear we've been revolutionary, but it's like, no, we've taken the system that we think we're fighting and we've put a bow around it and it's like, revolution.
Revolution.
Yeah.
I think I'll go next. I think for me, the thought process, things I'm thinking through about this question is particularly in the South African context because I think we have a tendency as African queers to kind of that thing about myopia, that like our perspectives end up being so narrow because the West becomes our ideas of perspective, our reference point of queerness when we are experiencing different kinds of queer identities, queer experiences, African queers, right? So I think for me, mainstream, how sharp is not Dayoba, but I think we're trying. I think especially in like queer hubs, by queer hubs, I say this in inverted commas because is Joburg really a queer hub? Is Cape Town really a queer hub?
No.
What is a queer hub in South Africa? Right? But I think I'm thinking about how we are represented also, and I think, hi man, very little representation across the board, right? Because all the stories we tell always end up being the same ones. Because also, SFBC is only going to find, or whomever's funding, they're only going to fund the specific kind of story, which means the pansexual femme body who's doing this and this, who's living a very what's that show? She's Gotta Have It. We don't have a South African She's Gotta Have It because I think the only representations we get to tell as African queers is like these deeply traumatic stories where the lesbian ends up being raped and murdered. The gay ends up doing this, marrying this for this, right? And I think those are the stories that we have to tell, or like even generations. I'm thinking of generations like Usendo Jason was this very particular form of masculinity and gayness that we were piped down growing up, right?
Down our throats.
Literally, it was like, I'm a gay, it's a 10. And those are the only stories we saw. And I think my critique about how we are represented is also just like very, very, very little open, one, pansexual representation, two, bisexual representation, three, lesbian representation, because the lesbians must always die.
Would you say that, I'm going to ask who came first, the chicken or the egg kind of question. Do you think that how queer people represent themselves has a lot to do with the media they were fed? Or do you say that the media feeds us this because that's how the queer presented themselves first?